The Quad grouping has agreed to jointly monitor waters in the Indo-Pacific. The US Secretary of State and counterparts from India, Japan and Australia in New Delhi, where they also announced a joint infrastructure project in the Pacific Islands and collaborations on energy and critical minerals.
A show of renewed unity among Quad nations with a fresh push on security in the Indo-Pacific. Without naming Beijing, the allies say they are seriously concerned about the situation in the South and East China Seas. China has overlapping claims with the Philippines and Japan in these waters, sometimes resulting in violent confrontations.
On the issue of maritime security, there are two big announcements. The first is the launch of the Indo-Pacific Maritime Surveillance Corporation Initiative, which is going to leverage each of our country's maritime surveillance capabilities in the Indo-Pacific to enhance information sharing. Related to that, of course, is also the expansion of the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative, which provides and can provide near real-time commercial maritime domain awareness data to countries throughout the Indo-Pacific.
In another first, the Quad unveiled plans in the Pacific, where China has been growing its presence through investments and loans.
We are launching a pilot for port infrastructure in Fiji. And I was in Fiji just a couple of weeks ago, and I know how important this will be to that country. It's a practical demonstration of our collective ability to deliver high quality, resilient infrastructure in partnership with the region.
The Quad also working to reduce dependence on China-dominated supply chains for critical minerals, key ingredients in the making of semiconductors, defense systems, and clean energy tech.
今回立ち上げた重要鉱物イニシアティブ枠組みは重要鉱物のサプライチェーンの強靭化の観点から非常に重要な取り組みであり、具体的な協力を進めてまいります。
The Quad failed to hold a leaders' summit last year, raising questions over its long-term direction. But officials insist the grouping is central to maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Whether it is economic activity, energy trade or maritime commerce, the Indo-Pacific will become even more important to the world. The responsibilities of the Quad will grow commensurately, and we must prepare for that.
China has criticized the Quad as a Cold War-style grouping aimed at containing its rise. It says cooperation between countries should not target any third party and undermine mutual trust.
Kate Fisher is monitoring developments with CNA from Washington, D.C. Neha Poonia has the latest for us from New Delhi. Let's start with you, Kate. Concerns since Mr. Trump re-entered the White House on how committed the U.S. is to allies, including those in the Quad grouping. So Mr. Rubio is saying, confirming its place in U.S. global strategy. What does that say really about Washington's foreign policy at this point?
Well, yeah, I think it does elevate the Quad to, not just a forum for dialogue, but a practical geopolitical mechanism that can really have some effect. It will see supply chains elevated as an issue that this forum can talk about, maritime security, technology. So it's not just about balancing China, but all these other things as well. And I think it also shows how there is some continuity between administrations, that a recognition that the Indo-Pacific is a vital geopolitical arena for the United States. And it kind of cements the Quad as permanent infrastructure rather than something that perhaps Donald Trump wasn't as interested in, and just reaffirms that the Indo-Pacific is one of, if not the top geopolitical issue for the Trump administration. And also, I think it shows that it's not just about balancing China, but also it goes beyond defense. Now, there was a lot of discussion about supply chains and critical minerals, showing that it can have a wider remit.
Neha, Dr. S. Jaishankar, so that's India's foreign minister, describing talks as an exercise of considerable value. But we heard Kate there, the concerns about balancing China, not such a welcome response from Beijing.
That's right. We've heard from Beijing, Vesu, and it's an iteration of a response they've issued in the past as well. They've said that we do not support exclusive small circles or bloc confrontation, and no cooperation should undermine mutual trust and cooperation among regional countries. China has viewed this grouping with a fair amount of distrust, saying it's an attempt to contain its progress, something New Delhi has denied. And the reason why we're hearing that sort of response from China is because of the announcements that have been made. A lot of them focused on China's dominance in the region and counterbalancing that. In particular, of course, the Quad Critical Minerals Initiative, which Quad Foreign Minister says aimed at ensuring that they create trusted critical mineral supply chains, an area that Beijing currently has dominance in. They've also, of course, announced the first joint infrastructure project, which is to jointly build that port in Fiji. Quad officials saying this is to respond to insufficient port capacity in the Pacific Islands. We know that this is something China excels in, building infrastructure quickly in the region, and Quad wanting to step up on that front as well. Of course, the other focus is on maritime surveillance. We've heard from Indian officials. They've said categorically this is not the militarization of the Quad. This is aimed at sharing information in real time and helping those countries in the region that don't have access to logistical resources that Quad nations do. New Delhi also taking a stance it has in the past, which is to say this is not a bloc that's against a particular country. It's more about like-minded countries working together.
Neha, these agreements that you just outlined, they are between foreign ministers in New Delhi. Of course, hopes that this might lay the groundwork for an even higher level meeting involving leaders. Now, this did not happen last year. Expectations that there might be a Quad meeting involving leaders this year.
That's right. That was the expectation, Vesu, when the Quad foreign ministers sat down for what was a very brief meeting, under an hour. The expectation was that they would discuss when the next leaders summit could take place. It was supposed to happen last year, but given India-US trade tensions, Donald Trump did not travel to New Delhi, so that summit did not happen. There was talk of possibly coming upon a date at this forum, deciding when that date for a leaders level summit could be potentially end of the year, but there was no such announcement made. Quad foreign ministers were asked later about whether or not this was discussed. They've said they all remain committed to helping arrange a date for that eventual leaders summit, but there is no confirmation of whether it's even going ahead. New Delhi would like to host it. It's the current chair. It maintains that its chairmanship continues, and it's unclear when it's going to hand over to Australia. But it's looking increasingly likely that a leaders level summit may not happen this year, given scheduling concerns and conflicts that already exist with the Indian Prime Minister's planned engagements and his travels abroad. But there are questions around the relevance of the group. Foreign ministers saying they remain committed. They will continue meeting in this format. But the fact that the leaders summit has not happened, does that blunt the capability of this group to send out that united message? That's what many experts are talking about. But it's unclear whether any sort of consensus can be found later, perhaps.
Well, thanks. Neha, Poonia, she was speaking to us from Delhi, of course, where the latest Quad meeting of foreign ministers has been held. And back to you, Kate. Kate Fisher from Washington. Of course, this meeting taking place as war continues, or rather a resolution to the war, hopes for an extension to a ceasefire that continues. We have seen no positive signs of that actually taking place at this point. This war on Iran, how has that, or anxieties because of war, did you see that having an impact on the types of agreements reached by Quad foreign ministers?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of, rather than derail the agreements, it's accelerated them to an extent. It's really focused the minds of these foreign ministers about the potential for crisis in waterways. So we've seen agreements over intelligence sharing, much more advanced intelligence sharing now. Also joint projects on things like reinforcing port infrastructure in strategic areas like Fiji, for example. So I think that rather than just looking ahead strategically at how to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific, it's kind of really the crisis in Iran has really focused them on the vulnerabilities that's exposed on things like fuel supply and maritime security. So I think it's kind of elevated what the Quad has achieved at this meeting rather than had a slowing or distracting effect, despite the kind of internal geopolitical issues amongst each individual country's relationship with Iran. So it wasn't really an anti-Iran meeting, but it was really clear that these countries were looking at the problems exposed by what's happened in the Iran conflict and looking to beef up their intelligence, their infrastructure in terms of fuel supply and economic security, and not just as it regards to China's influence in the region.
War in the Middle East might have focused, as you suggested, on issues of disruptions to supply, disruptions to energy. But you could also argue that war in the Middle East could have taken attention away from much-needed unity in the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific. How would you assess that?
Yeah, I think that's right. It could have done, but it appears from certainly what Marco Rubio has been saying and the deliverables that have been announced at the end of this meeting that actually some really important and tangible results have happened between these foreign ministers, and they have decided on some significant advances in their relationship. And I think it could have had the potential to derail negotiations for sure, but actually I think it's had the opposite effect and really focused the minds of these ministers and got them to agree to perhaps more than they would have done without the example of the Iran war going on at the same time. Instead of just looking at this forum, the Quad Forum, as a strategic China countering mechanism, they're also using it as a kind of way of crisis management. How can they make sure that immediate changes are made to try to beef up their maritime security and their fuel supply lines? So it could have derailed it, but I think instead it's had the opposite effect.
All right. Kate will be staying us in just a short moment to take a look at other issues arising from this push to extend the ceasefire between the US and Iran. Meanwhile, moving